introduction of me. Yes, hello. Hello, this is Abhinav Damor, ITC's Bio Secretary. I'm also the moderator for today's session. And thank you everyone for coming out. It's really quite something to see all of you here. So I could introduce our speaker, but it doesn't really feel necessary. So Bhaskar Krishnan is the Senior Director and Head of Product at Rakuten. He was also the ex-head of product at Flipkart, and he was also the ex-Senior Director at InvestNet and ex-member at Yahoo, Credit Suisse, Barclays, Standard and Poor's. And so also did his MBA from IIM Ahmedabad and his BS from IIT Madras. And so since I mentioned that this list of credentials would just go on and we would almost certainly exceed the time limit. So sir, is it fine if we just dive into the subject?
Hey, we can totally dive in. My only concern is whether an IIT Madras chap should come down to the level of talking to IIT Bombay people.
All right, sir, we'll see about that. Okay, sure, sir. So the first question is very basic as to since fintech is definitely one of the buzzwords right now, and a lot of our attendees here might not know exactly what it is. So could you give us maybe a broader perspective on that?
Sure, definitely. Hey, so the way I look at fintech, and in fact, the way most of you should be looking at any tech is the same way innovations have happened in many industries. You have innovations happening in tech, right? And in fact, I mean, most of you, I'm sure, were born or had access to smartphones when you're growing up. And I'm sure texting money to each other is now second nature, right? I mean, thanks to UPI, thanks to PhonePe, Paytm, and some of these apps, it's very easy to send money to each other. So that's essentially the beginning of fintech, right? So what you're essentially saying is, look, you have the ability to transfer money from one entity to the other. You have the ability to identify who the entities you're sending money to, and you have the ability to look at the entire financial services layer and say, hey, not I can introduce technology into various aspects of what they do, right? And that is essentially the fundamental definition of what is fintech, right? You take processes, you take financial services, you take what has been done historically and introduce technology. But the way to introduce technology is not really like the old school business process reengineering or the business process automation, etc. You break down the steps, right? And this is the key, right? I mean, ultimately, in anything in technology, if you look at what a Facebook did, Facebook lets you connect with each other without really having an email, having to type out an email address, having to come up with a phone number. You essentially open the app and identify the person you want to message to and message them. Or you open the app and it's similar to the electronic bulletin boards that we used to have in colleges. And I'm sure IIT Bombay, you might still have some such versions. You send a message, it goes to your newsfeed, goes to the entire world, right? Therefore, the same way, you need to send money from one entity to the other. It's person A to person B or person A to merchant A. You send the money, nothing else in the middle matters. Visa, MasterCard, a point of sale terminal, swiping a credit card, going through a network, going to the bank, none of these things matter. All that matters is sending money from person A to person B, right? And this also goes back to the definition of what is tech, right? So tech eliminates the need for middlemen. If you look at the entire global economy, if you look at the companies in S&P 500, or if you look at the companies even in India, a lot of these companies are middlemen, right? I mean, you could say that, hey, a Visa, a MasterCard is a middleman. You could say that a Walmart or a Target is a middleman standing between you, the consumer, and the brand, right? I mean, you would go to a big store like a Walmart or a Target to buy products and goods, which were manufactured by an entity, branded by a different entity. But now you can go to Amazon, get unbranded stuff directly from the manufacturer, right? So that's essentially tech, and fintech is doing the same thing that is happening in the rest of the world.
All right, that's really interesting. Okay, sir. And so could you also tell us what sort of future does fintech hold for us?
Sure. So the perspective here is, I mean, we should look at anything in tech, right? I mean, let's go back to what I mentioned earlier, right? Let's look at the life of any particular person, or essentially look at any average individual. They typically go to work. I mean, sure, some of you will become entrepreneurs, some of you will start your own ventures, but ultimately you go to work. So you essentially work at a business, be it your own business or a different business. And then you monetize that work by getting paid for it. You get paid maybe every month or every couple of weeks, or maybe you also get stock, and that's held in a particular place. Right? That place is called an account. It could be a bank
Yes, sir.
account. It could be a brokerage account. Essentially, it's an account. So an account is nothing but a place to park value, right? So there's a business, then there's an account where you park value, but then you take that money and you spend that money. That spending is done by different mechanisms. You call that credit cards, debit cards. You call that prepaid cards or gift coupons, Sudokus, or now you also have apps that let you do it, right? So these are all payment mechanisms. Once you,
Mm,
when you don't have the payment in your account, you then use credit. That's a personal loan, that's a home loan, that's a car loan. And ultimately, this credit is spent in a business again, right? This credit is spent at a merchant. It could be Walmart, it could be a car company, it could be any merchant that sells goods and services, right? So now
mm,
I have placed almost 5 different stacks. So you have businesses where people work, you have accounts that are parks of value. Again, this could even be a crypto account. You then have payment mechanisms. You then have credit mechanisms when you don't have the money. Then you have businesses where you spend your goods and services, right? So to me, this is ultimately all of commerce, right? And if you look at fintech per se, fintech comes in the park of value, right? The account is fintech, payment mechanism is fintech, credit is fintech, and even the intermediate layers where the business where you work in or where, that you own sends money into your account, that's essentially the payment mechanism for them, again becomes fintech. Then the way the credit gets offered to the merchant or the way the payment goes to the merchant again becomes fintech. And then you also have something called insurance at the bottom. How do you insure your products, your goods and services, or ultimately how you insure your life? So all of these things are fintech, right? So once you have
mm.
this building blocks approach, it becomes easy to understand what is fintech, becomes easy to understand what is commerce, and then figure out, hey, which of these portions make sense for me as a company to build or me as an individual to go and solve, right?
So, would you say that fintech is designed to be a threat to our sort of our firmly established traditional financial service providers, since it's so much more nimble and provides such faster and better service for us?
Sure. I mean, I would say very interesting perspective, right? I mean, if you dial back maybe a few years or maybe a couple of decades, right? The biggest banks in India in the 80s and 90s were Citibank, HSBC Bank, and then you had SBI and some of the industrial banks, right? And then in the late 80s or early 90s is when ICICI Bank was formed as essentially, I mean, even now I think the name is Industrial something Bank, right? I forget the full form. But ICICI came out of its industrial lending roots. Then HDFC was created as a private bank by Amish Puri, and again from lending roots, right? So if you look at the last 20 to 30 years in India, I would say that the biggest disruptors in the fintech ecosystem have actually been ICICI and HDFC, right?
Yes.
And it doesn't really sound sort of very techy, but if you look at what they have done, they have taken processes that the traditional companies had and they have reframed and reformed them, and they have grown. I mean, in fact, HDFC and ICICI have been two of the highest growth companies, and in fact, HDFC, especially where they focus on the consumer and focus on consumer problems, has been a super high growth company, right? Therefore, I would say that yes, fintechs are threats to large entities. Fintechs are threats to existing financial services providers, but the same providers, once they tech enable themselves, can compete and can do the same thing, right? So, for instance, the question will be, hey, can HDFC ever be as nimble as a phone pay, right? Can
Yes.
HDFC ever do the same type of stuff that a Bharat Pay is doing? Can
Mm.
HDFC come up with maybe crypto trading and other stuff that a Zerodha is doing? And yes, over there, I think some of the regulations and some of the traditional businesses might hold them back. But my perspective is yes, totally right. I mean, any new entrants in any industry are threats to incumbents. And the perspective is how do incumbents compete with them? And as long as the incumbents are nimble, the way HDFC has been nimble over the last 20 years, I think they should be fine. But you still need to look at it as an entire ecosystem and keep running and keep innovating. And I would say that HDFC is way more innovative than a typical American bank. But yes, a Bharat Pay, a Phone Pay, a Paytm are light years ahead of rest of the companies, right?
Yes. So definitely. So you have sort of painted a picture for us of what the future of fintech would look like, and what would you say is the role that Rakuten, your let's come to Rakuten now. What role is Rakuten playing in this future that you've painted for us?
Sure. Yeah. Hey, so but let's just not talk about Rakuten, right? Let's think about what is the role that any big company can play, right? Look, a
Definitely,
company like Rakuten, and in fact, I'll even go back to HDFC. So the perspective is we have consumers. I mean, HDFC might have 50 million consumers, and they might have a few million businesses. And Rakuten, likewise, in Japan, we have about 25 million credit card holders, about 50 million prepaid card holders, and so on. So the perspective is once you have this particular base, how do you build on this base, right? And
mm,
here I'm going to slightly change the question. And the question should not be, hey, what can you do as a company? Ultimately, it goes back to what is the customer problem I'm solving, right? And this is something that all tech companies do better than existing companies, right? Because
definitely.
existing companies came from, hey, I'm doing A, let me do B, because B is similar to A, or B is close to A, or B will help me make more money. The perspective should become, hey, I am a company that's here to solve a problem, a use case for a customer. What is that use case? What is the problem I'm solving? And once you go about building from that perspective, it completely changes the perspective, right? Therefore, at Rakuten, our perspective is we are a Japanese heavy company, and we have continued to innovate in the Japanese market. In fact, Rakuten didn't have apps in Japan, and my team launched the Rakuten Payments app, and it's the
Mm,
second largest payments app in Japan. Likewise, we are now working on building out a debit and credit card platform in the US and a payments platform, and all these are going to be innovative. We are not in India yet, but a lot of our lessons are learned from what's happening in India and China, right? So to me, I think the good news is you guys being in India, you have the ability to be on the ground, learn what's happening on the ground, and then figure out how to apply it, right? I keep telling my teams that you are restricted only by your imagination and your ambition, right? Nothing else actually stops people these days because it's very easy to build apps. It's very easy to code. I mean, even people that are not coders can come up, use no code protocols to code. So nothing really stops people except your imagination. I mean, imagination is the ability to think and ability to solve problems. Then your ambition, which is the willingness to dive in, and the stomach to essentially say, hey, I'm going to go through all the obstacles that come in my way.
so I think these are some really wonderful insights that you've shared about life. So, sir, could you tell us about your experience in this field, about your experience in maybe fintech and e-commerce?
Sure, totally. Yeah.
Apart from Rakuten, sir, maybe we'll come to
Oh,
Rakuten
totally.
after that.
Mhm. So, I mean, I think so. My background is fairly interesting. Right? Look, after finishing IIT and IIM, I went to banking and capital markets and spent about 12 years there. Actually, close to 13 years there. Had a great career, enjoyed it. Lived in New York, was one of the best periods of my life. You learn a lot. I mean, I think one of the advantages that I think maybe folks like you guys have these days is the partnerships that the IITs have with global universities, the internship programs, etc. And in my days, we didn't really have much of them, right? So to me, for a lot of us working or living in a New York or abroad was our internship plus our cross-cultural experience plus our ability to work and learn, right? Um, Loved that, enjoyed that. But again, for someone like me that was always focusing on growth after 2008 and after the financial markets slowed down, it wasn't interesting enough to be in banking. Sure, the money was there, but it just wasn't exciting enough, right? I mean, this again goes back to the imagination part. Once there's no imagination, it's very tough to say, hey, I'm just going to go and do the same thing every day for the rest of my life, right? And again, there are people that love doing it, and there's no problem if they are fine doing that, right? Ultimately, you need to figure out where is your spectrum of imagination and ambition. So move to tech. And once I move to tech, the perspective is you want to go closer to the customer, you want to go closer to the tech platform, and you want to go closer to solving problems on a continual basis. So that has been my journey. So my journey has been, let's look at the biggest pain point that's in the market, look at the biggest pain point for customers and keep solving it in a systematic manner, right? That pain point when I started off at Yahoo was in essentially ads and the spammy ads that used to exist, and how do you essentially
Mm-hmm.
make them into relevant ads. Like this, when I came at Flipkart, again, the perspective is, hey, look, let's make Flipkart more profitable. How do you get that? And again, advertising and discovery of products is a very good way for Flipkart to make money, but also to add to the user experience. Right here again, it's not about spamming people, but showing relevant ads to people. Right. and then it became, how do you personalize the entire e-commerce journey? And while we were personalizing the journey and helping on digital marketing, helping on personalizing the content, right? Personalizing is essentially coming up with different home pages or different screens for every one of you and your classmates based on your interest, right? Like you might love maybe bikes, someone else might love sports shoes, someone else might love SLR cameras, someone else might love maybe apparel, someone else might love plaid shirts. So ultimately it's about personalizing the content based on your interests and your needs. Once you do that and you realize that, hey, you know what, I have essentially gone and optimized for every one of these pieces. And ultimately the biggest pain point seems to be the payments piece in India, right? Because a few years ago in India, what happened was, right now you have the Razor Pays of the world, you have the Bharat Pays, Phone Pays of the world, but a few years ago we didn't have that. So the payment gateway used to be the biggest pain point, right? So the HDFCs and ICICs of the world had optimized their networks for credit card swipes. The networks were not optimized for e-commerce transactions. Therefore, almost 30 to 40% of all the transaction fails came from the payment gateways, right? Which is very ironical, right? So it looks like they had optimized the network for hardware devices that would send electrical pulses back to their network about transactions. And they had almost a 99.999% success rate on that. Whereas for e-commerce transactions, which were all digital transactions that came to the web or that came through an app, the optimization was very minimal, right? So we came up with consumer lending and we came up with multiple mechanisms. And this is the reason why a Razor Pay exists. A Razor Pay is nothing but a payments gateway in India, right? They sit between all the e-commerce entities and then the banks and the other networks at the back, right? And Paytm, in fact, has a huge payment gateway business that most people are not aware of. And that's essentially a very interesting layer to build, right? So the perspective is look at the biggest pain point, the biggest problem to solve, and keep solving for it. And once you keep solving for it, other problems will come up, right? You will look at other areas that you can optimize. And the perspective is therefore always, and especially for you guys, right, at the life stage and career stage you're in, focus on the problem, and then the company, and then the people, right? It's not about the people, problem, company. It should be like our brand name first, and then the team you work with, and then the problem you solve. And I think that's the easier route that most people take. Hey, I went to IIT, now I have to get into a Google, I have to get into a Facebook, I have to get into some of these companies. Get into those companies because of the problem space they're solving. And then focus on the people you work with and the people you'll be learning from. And then ultimately it should be the brand, right? And I know that's a very direct way of answering your question, but ultimately, once you focus on this way, what next will be clear. And how do you essentially build a career and build a journey will also be clear, right?
Yes, definitely. So what would you say is sort of your vision in this field currently in fintech and e-commerce?
Hey, so ultimately, it will go back to breaking down all middlemen, right? And in fact, if you look at what a company like Stripe is doing in the US or a Square is doing in the US, or if you look at China, look at what a Alipay or a WeChat or a WePay have done. They pretty much said that, hey, look, we are going to build consumer ecosystems and merchant ecosystems. And ultimately, all that consumers care about is paying to merchants, and all that merchants care about is getting paid from consumers. And once you just take that vision and you eliminate everything else, you come up with a killer ecosystem, right? And in a way, India, I mean, I reserved India for the end. India already has this. I mean, I do not know how many of you know about UPI or the Unified Payment Interface or the gateway that the government came up with, but UPI is pretty much the best version of payment gateway anywhere in the world, right? The beauty of UPI, any entity, not just ICICs and HDFCs, even the SBIs, anyone else in the world can come up with a UPI authentication layer, just connect to UPI and enable payments from anyone to anyone, right? So SBI interestingly came up with one of the most innovative apps called YONO, Y-O-N-O. I think it's like you only need one account, right? So SBI YONO is one of the most innovative bank accounts in the whole world, right? So it's very interesting to look at the vision should only be based on customers, merchants. Customers want to spend money wisely. Customers don't care about pain points. Customers don't want to stand in lines in ATMs or in banks. They only care about the experience. They only care about not wasting their time. right? So ultimately, right, the perspective is what brings joy to customers, what helps them with their transactions. And then merchants, they don't care about fees. They don't care about essentially random policies of banks and payment networks and exchanges. They just care about offering services to customers and getting paid for it in return. And once you have both of these in mind, you will be able to solve all problems, right? So the vision is going to be a very simple vision. How close can we get to a UPI layer where I'm connecting entities with each other? And how do I solve the pain points for both these entities?
So currently, India has been doing quite well in this sort of sector or stratum
Mm-hmm.
of fintech.
Definitely, India is doing very well. But again, the problem in India is, look, even though I talked about UPI, I talked about some of these things and saying it's one of the best, right? Look, it's still
Mm.
accessible only to the top 30 to 50 million people, right? I mean, the problem
Oh,
in India is
yes.
it's not the fintech innovation, right? I think
Hmm.
India has other challenges and bigger challenges because people like you and me are not the typical representative Indian, right? How much ever we feel we are, right? I mean, I think India, I recently read an article, literally it was written by another IIT, IIM person, and he's actually 65 or 70, and he essentially wrote about how even when he was 55 years old and he was the president of a company in Bombay, he thought that he was middle class, right? And only when he spoke to his gym trainer and he was talking about how he's middle class and he's still thinking about what to do with his life and all that, and the gym trainer felt insulted, right? Because that person had made a
Uh,
life and career for himself. He came from a second year, third year town, had come to Bombay, now had a bike. His kids were going to private school, and he was actually middle class, right? This president of this
hmm.
company was not. So what ends
Yes,
up happening in
definitely.
India is we all still have that mentality that hey, we don't have enough, or we are not rich, or we essentially don't have control over our lives. But we are still a
Hmm.
very, very sheltered 30 to 50 million people. The problem in India is not catering to these. I think the government has done great. Now it's about how do you bring the remaining 950 million people online, right? How do you get them better services? How do you get them better products? But even there's something like UPI, since it removes all the fees that middlemen charge, is great. But now we still need manufacturing, we still need services, we still need a lot of other things that are actually not related to fintech, that are not related to e-commerce, right? That matter for us.
Yes. So I think so. What sort of is there a solution that you think is that could possibly be used to make it accessible to the whole population, or is this
Look,
not really a solvable problem currently?
look, I don't think any problem is not solvable, right?
Yes.
It's a will, right? I mean, I think, look, just a few quick comments over there before we move, right? Because I mean, this will then end up becoming like a political discussion or what the country should do, and it's very tough for people like you and me to discuss that, right? But look, I think I read somewhere that the biggest portion of Swiss bank accounts were Indian, right? And
Yes.
so I'm not even saying, hey, cash them all because that's an impossibility. But even if you at least release those funds on Swiss bank accounts and put them back in India, maybe
Hmm.
charge them 5 or 10% as a penalty or as a tax. At least that money will go back to work in India. I mean, I think this is where the US has done a great job, right, compared to
Ah,
India and the
yes.
policies. So in the US, yes, people become wealthy, and you could even say that some of these people have become wealthy by illegal means, by selling guns, by selling drugs, by doing whatever, whatever. Sure, you and me cannot sort of sit down and talk about it. But what the US has done is they have enabled all this money to stay within the country. Right? People
Hmm.
don't really need to send the money to a Swiss bank account. So now staying within the country, and some of you might have read about money supply and how money supply has a multiplier effect and so on. So staying within the country essentially now means that that money is invested in mutual funds, private equity funds, or venture capital. Private equity
Hmm.
funds invested in a certain way, mutual funds invested in public markets, venture capital then
Yes.
enables and empowers the next generation of entrepreneurs. So now you see how this money, just because it doesn't leave the ecosystem, has a multiplier effect. The problem in India, I think, used to be that this money used to leave our system, right? I think except for a few Ambanis or a few Gottages or a few, I don't know, large industries, maybe Tata and so on, most of the other folks used to look at this as an ATM where they took money out and then put it somewhere else, right? So I'm actually hopeful that this is changing
Hmm.
because now you see people like Sachin Bansal, who, even though he became a billionaire after Flipkart, essentially spent all that money, 700 million buying Navi, and now he's focused on small business loans. He's focused on uh,
Yes.
peer-to-peer loans. He's focused on things that will add value to the next billion people. So I would say that I'm optimistic, but it's not a single answer. Ultimately, you need to make it easy and make it better for people to have the money in the ecosystem. And then, yes, you need to remove a lot of inefficiencies. I think India's
Hmm.
infrastructure is a problem, but a lot of these things can only be solved by, I think, enabling entrepreneurship, by enabling people to go and do more. And this is also where people like you, man, you and others on the call should be saying, hey, you know
Hmm.
what? Do I really care about the comfort that a large brand will give me? Or can I essentially go and accept the risk in a startup? Because in reality, it's not really risky, right? I mean, you guys are already IIT Bombay, and the startup will give you enough to essentially meet all your needs. And as long as you don't really need to buy a BMW, need to buy, I don't know, a Rolex watch, any of those things, right? The question then becomes, what am I really solving for, right?
Yes, yes, definitely. So I'll just take 1 minute and address the attendees. So if you all have any question during this session, please DM them to me. And sir, actually, there's one question in the chat. I'll just read that for you.
Sure.
They want to know about what exactly your sort of job entailed as the head of product. Like currently, you're the head of product at Rakuten and the other firms that you've been at. They're
Mhm.
sort of asking what exactly your job entailed.
Sure. Hey, look, I mean, it's tough to define what a job entails. It's ultimately so let's talk into how we look at anything. Right? So look, when I joined Rakuten, I started working with a team of people, and those people were working on solving some problems that Rakuten had, or working on migration or other issues for, I would say, Rakuten in Japan. Right. So you can say this is similar to what an IT company might end up doing. Right.
Hmm.
Now the question is, hey, look, we have the tech, we have the ability to program and code, which is why my team was getting the job, right? So
Uh,
you need to have the ability to manage people that program. So there's a lot of project management, program management techniques that are online, and a lot of these things have gotten automated these days, right? So that's definitely part of my job, right? I talk about, I essentially say that's the how, but even in the how, that's essentially a low level of the how, right? But ultimately, in any job, you need to think about, hey, why is it that we are doing what we're doing? So a lot of my
hmm.
job is focused on framing the why, right? What is the problem that
Yes.
Rakuten is solving? Why is Rakuten building a payments app? Why is
Hmm.
Rakuten building a new portal for our credit card? Why are we doing migration for the prepaid card? So the why, and here is why you cannot be lazy. You need to ask 3 whys or 5 whys before you get to the correct answer, right? So you need to be sort of on the dot, right? Hey, why am I launching a prepaid card? Or why am I launching a payments app? Well, I'm launching a payments app because there are two competitors that have launched a payments app. Why are the competitors launching payments app? Well, the top competitor is owned by Alibaba, and they are the
Hmm.
number one company in Japan, and they want to be they're the number one company in China. They want to be number one in Japan. Why does
Yes.
Alipay or PayPay want to be number one company in Japan? Well, it looks like Japanese customers are very rich and consumers, and we have, from a per capita basis, consumers that are even richer than in the US.
Hmm.
But why would those consumers want to use a payments app when they already have prepaid cards and credit cards? Well, it looks like PayPay is giving them lots of offers and coupons and promotions. But why are
Yes.
they accepting the offers and coupons and promotions? Because it helps them on the e-commerce discovery journey, and it helps the small stores, and it helps the merchants, and people in Japan care about the neighborhood. They want to keep
Hmm.
money within the neighborhood, and they don't really care about sending money to the Amazon for the world, right? So unless you ask these
Yes.
5 questions, you will not be able to get to the real answer.
Hmm.
So when I joined Rakuten, we were still at the question number one. Why are we launching a prepaid app? Because we have competitors, therefore we are launching. Now, if you're at that level compared to this level, you'll only be doing surface level stuff. And this is the biggest advice I'll give all of you folks, right? Do not be at the surface level. Go deep, go as deep as you can, and extend it end to end. Right?
Hmm.
So most of my job is in the why, but that is now, right? After almost 20 years of working. Early in a career, a lot of your job will be on the how. How do I become the
Okay.
best programmer? How do I essentially get more attention to detail?
Hmm.
How do I effectively do the job, right? So unless you do the how, because the how will essentially give you an understanding, then there's the what, right? What am I doing? What is the intersection of the why and the how? And you think about what can I do, right? If I'm a Rakuten, in these 5 questions, what can I do first? What can I do second? What is it that I do today to be able to do the end-to-end next year, right?
Hmm.
So this is what my job entails, right? So you could talk about working with sales, marketing, product strategy, product vision. All this sounds sexy, right? And everyone says, hey, I want to be a product visionary. It's not sexy at all. It's very
Yes.
painful. It's very difficult. And then a lot of project program management, interlocking, discussing, thinking about your product and your tools and being very hands-on and stakeholder management. And then ultimately the how is the actual execution, right? And typically everyone wants to be on the why. Everyone says, hey, I want to be Mark Zuckerberg. I want to be this, I want to be that. But again, ultimately the why, they all came
Hmm.
from starting at the how and being very hands-on in the how, being knowledgeable about the how, because it's easier to go from how to what to why. Very difficult if you're not hands-on and if you can't motivate other people or engage other people to go from the why to the what to the how, right?
Yes. Yes, definitely. That's all true. And actually, we have like 5 people in the chat that are asking, what sort of role does ML and AI play in all of this? I think this is a question that we have to address. I think most of the attendees here also share this sort of question. So, could you sort of tell us? I think all of these attendees have a sort of proclivity towards machine learning and artificial intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
So, is fintech, do these fields also play a huge role in fintech?
Okay. Hey, look, ML AI data is going to play a role in anything you do going forward, right? And
Yes.
let's go back to the example of state-owned HDFC Bank. HDFC Bank has one of the best data intelligence practices in all of India, right? So if you look at HDFC, and if you look at all the bad loans that happened in India in the last 20 years, not a single one of those loans was made by HDFC, which very much
Uh-huh.
means that they have the data, they have the analysis, and they have the objectivity to say that we will look at the data analysis and not just some random gut feel, right? So if a plain old HDFC bank can do it, anyone else can do it, right? Therefore, data analytics MLAI is going to be the core of everything you do. So in fact, I do not know if you recall my conversation about Flipkart and what I did and the entire personalization and the
Hmm.
ads journey, that is nothing but a data platform, right? So you look at a customer, you look at a customer data platform, you look at personalizing the customer experience from top to bottom. What you're pretty much saying is, hey, I have the ability to look at customers, understand their needs, and at each level of the customer journey, I am offering them personalization that helps them move down the journey. That comes from machine learning models. In fact, at Flipkart, we had 100 million customers and we had a real-time machine learning model. A lot of this good news is it doesn't need to be as difficult as when we did it 5 years ago.
Hmm.
Google BigQuery, Looker, and a lot of platforms like Imply are now automating and giving simple access to anyone and everyone, right? So the good news
Yes.
is, and this might contradict a little bit of what I said, the good news is once you know the why, it's increasingly easy to do the how these days. But you'll never be able to go to the right how without knowing the bits and pieces of what to do and what not to do.
Uh-huh.
Right?
Yes.
So I can go to Google BigQuery, I can go to Looker, I can look at any big data platform, even AWS, and say, hey, AWS is giving me all the tools. But the funny thing is, AWS is giving 350 tools. They literally have 350 tools in ML and AI. The question is, what tool makes sense for me? How do I know the difference between the right tool? Am I bringing a knife to a gunfight, or am I bringing a bazooka or a rocket launcher to a sort of gunfight? Are all the questions that you would need to answer. So yes,
Yes.
MLAI plays a part in everything. And in fact, when I talked about Rakuten Pay, MLA plays a part in personalization. MLA plays a part in understanding the merchants, in showing the right offers and right coupons to people, in coming up with the loyalty program, and in also looking at machine fixing the machine, right? I mean, if my app is not working properly, can I understand why my app is not working properly and have the machine fix itself? So every one of these components has ML and AI pieces to it.
So, all right, since now you're on the Y stage, I think. So, is that something that you could have done and that could have boosted your progress back when you were in your how and what stage?
So I would
Like,
say
I
that,
think, like you
sure.
mentioned, that everyone sort of looks and wants to be at the Y position. But a lot of them don't really know the intricacies and the prerequisites that they need to go through the how and what.
Hey, so I'm actually going to answer the question slightly differently, right? So if at all anything, I would say that, look, again, people like me, like I was not just IIT. I unfortunately also went to IIM and got an MBA. Therefore, people like
All
me
right.
thought that we were why superstars on day one, and then
Hmm.
had to essentially slow down and go back to the how, right? So I would say that look, for most people going to the career, so most people doing their jobs, right? The first 90 days, the first 6 months matter. So just go and execute. Just go and do the mindless stuff that people might ask you to do, because by doing that mindless stuff, you would think
Hmm.
about how to efficiently do it. I mean, ultimately, right, when you look at the progression of the quality of a task, the first step is efficiency, the next step is effectiveness, right? So essentially, if
Yes.
you're
Yes.
going to be coding something or solving some bug or fixing a bug, right, there could be a way to efficiently do it that will actually save you anywhere from 20 to 40% of the time, or even 40 to 60% of the time, right? Which is great, right? But you still need to know why the bug exists. You still need to know how to do it, right? So the first step is efficiency. The next step is effectiveness. Effectiveness pretty much means that how do I reduce the time that I take by 10x, not by 40 or 60%, but how can I make it 10%? And that really needs a deep understanding of what is it that you're doing, right? Therefore, this goes back to the how, right? So how matters a lot. And lots of times we might be doing the how, and maybe this is the advice I might give, that how much ever I focus on the why, the advice that I would actually give most people is trust the system. Trust, once you make a decision, trust the system, trust the company, and you might feel miserable while you're doing it, but focus
Hmm.
on the how, because a deep understanding of the how is what will take you forward, right? A deep understanding of the how and how inefficient things are, how painful things are, is what will take you forward, right? Because that pain point that you have is also the pain point other people have. Now, how can you build a company from that pain point, right? So if you look at Salesforce, if you look at a lot
Hmm.
of these sales, B2B sales companies, or even if you look at what a Flipkart did, I mean, Sachin and Vinny were working at Amazon, and they said, hey, Amazon does not have an India presence because it's impossible to build an e-commerce company in India. Then they went and built it. Paytm, same thing happened, right? It's impossible to essentially send money to people. Or even if you look at a
Ah.
very infrastructure example, you look at Deccan Air. So Deccan Air, Captain, I forget his name, but he launched Deccan Air because when he was in the army, he could not get from Kashmir to Mysore to see his dad, who unfortunately died before he could go, right? He had to take a train, and that took him 4 or 5 days. So that pain point that you have will be the pain point a lot of other people have, right? So interestingly, the how can essentially serve as a fundamental building block of the what and the why. So I would say embrace the how, right? It's almost like embrace the grind. I mean, I know it sounds very cliche, but embrace the
All
grind,
right.
embrace the how, and give deep thought into it. And just don't do mindless stuff. But for deep thought, you need to know it inside out. You need to essentially be comfortable with it. Right?
So, during this sort of journey that you have told us, do you think there's maybe a quality or a particular experience that you felt was absolutely necessary for you to build such a successful career in this field?
Sure. Hey, and this goes back to the grind, right? Look, let's go back to
Okay.
one thing. Look, when I started off at Standard and Poor's many years ago, I felt, hey, I am IIT, I am top of the world, I'm better than a Harvard level guy. And then so this is the type of feeling you all have. And then Standard and Poor's throws you a bunch of data and says, hey, look, yes, we want you to be a product manager, we want you to come up with innovative indices, but this is
Hmm.
essentially the data that we have on the S&P Emerging Markets Index. We want you to analyze it and come up with a report. And you're like, what is this? Why am I doing it? There's an insult to me, insult to my intelligence. But no, unless you do it, you will not really understand what indices are.
All
Why do
right.
people come and invest in an index, etc., etc. So essentially, that grind of spending a year and a half at S&P in looking at the data, understanding what clients wanted, in client support, in product operations, is what gives you the grinding or the ground to essentially build on top. And likewise, when I moved from S&P to Barclays, I was maybe at the peak of my career at S&P, and Barclays came. It was a bigger platform, and I
Hmm.
also knew that I'll plateau at S&P because of the way S&P is very hands off from the market. So I wanted to go into Barclays. I started off in the risk management team, and again, mind-numbing, boring work, which I hated for the first few months because I had to look at risk management reports, exposure, credit exposure, market exposure, etc., etc. When I thought that, hey, no, I should be building new products for my clients, right? But again, you cannot build the new products without understanding the models behind it, without understanding the math behind it, the science behind it, and how the order management works, how the flow works, right? And then you start randomly, this goes to the efficiency. Then you accept it, and after about 6 to 9 months, I'll randomly be looking at reports I should not be looking at just to understand it better. Then I'll keep asking people questions, and then people will say, "Hey, how did you spot this? This is a very interesting problem, right?" And I would say I'm randomly looking at reports on a Friday afternoon when you don't need to do it, right? So that is where the insight comes, right? And that's also when people then realize, hey, you know what? This person is meticulous, thorough, thoughtful. He or she
Mm.
can be trusted. And then the network that you establish will help you. And then you can go and start doing new products. So without all that grind, right? So after about a year and a half at Barclays, the word got around that, hey, any new product development, go to Bhaskar. He knows the nuts and bolts and he
Mm.
can do it. So then there was a 2 year period where every 6 months Barclays used to be launching new products. It doesn't matter if it's US, UK, San Francisco, Tokyo, Hong Kong. People will call me. They will not call my boss. They will not call my boss's boss. They used to call me, right? So the grind matters, right? And then sometimes you lose it, right? Sometimes you forget it. So when I moved to again Yahoo, I thought that, hey, I'm already a superstar. I'm already at the Y level. Let's forget the grind.
Alright.
No man, grind matters. Again, at Flipkart, grinding is what took me to where I am, right? Therefore, what I'm saying is embrace the grind, but be smart, thoughtful, thorough. But that doesn't mean that you should be introverted. That doesn't mean you should not talk to other people. But
Yes.
essentially, focus on doing the work. Focus on asking the questions, and at the end of the day, also be nice. Don't be an ass about it. Right? Don't necessarily come and say, "Hey, I'm here to change the company. I'm here to company change the system." Yes, you're there to change the system, but you should also realize that other people are doing what they can, right? And within again the ambition and the imagination spectrums that they have, along with their risk-taking ability. Just because you're smart doesn't mean other people aren't. Just because you're smart doesn't mean other people might not have thought it through. Maybe they just restrict to themselves. But once they have this end-to-end mindset and maybe long-term vision, things change, right?
Mm. So you would say that on a rather the fundamental and rudimental thing that these that people need to follow is that first you need to prove your reliability and then
Mm-hmm.
sort of build on your competency, and then things would follow after that.
Definitely, right? And if things don't automatically follow in the place where you are, it can be a different
Mm.
place, and which is completely okay, right? I'm not saying just go and be in any one entity or any one company, right? But as long as you follow these simple steps, things will automatically happen, right?
Yes, I think a lot of them would have a good idea of how to maybe get ahead in life, but I think there's still a bit of ambiguity regarding what sort of job opportunities this field would offer to students,
Mm-hmm.
and sort of is the job market different here and abroad for this field?
Hey, so I would say that look, given that you guys are all IIT, right? So tech is here to stay, right? It doesn't matter if
Mm.
it's fintech, commerce tech, ad tech, etc., etc. Tech is here to stay. And the perspective, and this is also where I define the way India is. Within India, you maybe have still 30 to 50 million people with access to financial services and fintech. Still have 900 to 950 million people that don't have access, right? And the perspective is,
Yes.
will the governments help them or can people help themselves, right? And my perspective is, however far the ICICI banks and the HDFCs of the world have gone, the next 10 to 20 years, it's going to be the Bharat Pays, the phone pays, and companies that you might not even know. Maybe it's companies
Mm.
that people like you and your peers will be starting that will make a difference. So I would say, yes, grind a little bit, but just don't keep grinding. Don't keep wasting your life and time and brand names and whatever. There's enough money and capital available in the world for all of you to lead comfortable lives. Take risks, be ambitious, be highly imaginative. And once you essentially say, hey, you know what, I'm going to focus on tech and I'm going to focus on solving problems, and I'm an engineer, I'm a product manager, I'm going to keep building, I think sky is the limit, man. I don't think any of you should be concerned about what's next. Right? There's enough opportunities
uh,
available, enough problem areas to solve in all of these things. Right?
yes, definitely. But so people that are particularly targeting the fintech stratum sort of, so what would your sort of advice be for them? What should they be focusing on?
So platforms, data analytics, ML is definitely there. Then building platforms, right, which is hardcore computer science. How do I build a platform that can handle 50 million users, right? So that is all on, you call it C++, you call it Python, you call it Java. You can build
Mm.
platforms in any one of these things. So competence matters, skills matter, and data ML AI matters. Then user experience. I mean, a lot of people in India don't really value user experience much. I mean, the reason why it's easier to use a PhonePe app compared to a HDFC app is because PhonePe focuses on user experience. Right? How do I make it
Yes.
seamless for the user? So user experience is going to be a very interesting angle for people going forward. So you essentially focus on one of these things based on what your strengths are. Right? There could be some of you who are creative, focus on user experience. There could be some of you who are more back end and focus on building platforms at scale,
Mm.
focus on platforms. Some people are more data focused, focus on data. Some people focus more on the why. You will then have the unfortunate career like me of being a product manager, right? Therefore, ultimately focus on what you are: product manager, program manager, engineer, architect, engineering manager, or some of you are better at selling stuff, business side. I think that's the way to look at careers, right? And there's enough opportunities, again, in the way that I laid it out to be. Look, insurance will definitely be big in India, right? If you say that, hey, you know what, payments itself is only with 50 million people in India, think about insurance. LIC did a very good job of selling life insurance, but I think they have slowed down quite a bit. Think about access to insurance, access to benefits, right? I mean, one of the biggest companies, in fact, a company that's going to be a unicorn, they started off only last year in India, is a company called Nova Benefits. All that Nova does, it works with companies in offering benefits for the employers,
Mhm.
right? That's a very good space, right? And I know that I keep talking about Bharat Pay and Phone Pay, but even in that side, right? I mean, if you think about what Bharat Pay is doing now versus what it can do now, right? The sky is the limit, right? Because the ICICI banks of the world only have the ability to go and give loans to big merchants, right? They will maybe give loan to sort of shoe store, right? A branded shoe store or a shoe store maybe in Navi Mumbai. They'll not be able to go and give a loan to the person that maybe makes 100 shoes a month or 500 shoes a month and in his sort of shack somewhere in Mumbai and then gives it to the shoe store, right? But Bharat Pay can do that, right? So it's ultimately about credit or payments or enabling transactions to happen in the stack that I talked about. Right?
Yes, definitely. But I think there's just one last question from my side,
So
which would be that is there a sort of an experience or maybe something that you had to learn the hard way? And maybe if you would have known about this, maybe that could have helped in your rapidity and your pace to your where you are right now. Maybe something that could have helped you on earlier.
I mean, that's tough to say, right? Because look, ultimately, it doesn't matter if it's easy way or the hard way. And to me, the market is the ultimate arbiter, right? It's not that
Definitely.
there's something that's easy, there's something that's hard. And when you have a long career, there will be things that came to you the hard way. There'll be things that came to you the easy way. Look, right off the bat, right? And in fact, I keep telling people that some of the best periods in your life, it may not feel that way, or the best learnings come from the worst situations, right? So if you look at Flipkart, right, we built the ads
Mm.
group, and the ads group, we the revenues increased by almost 250x in 1 year, right? I mean, unheard of numbers, and we are the third largest advertising company in India. But if you look at the journey, my second month in ads, right, we were in deep trouble because we were almost 80% behind our numbers. Third month, we were 90% behind our numbers, and things were so
Okay.
bad that the then CEO,
Mm.
he fired the head of business on the spot in the middle of a business review meeting, right? And people were in shock. And we then had to go and completely rethink what advertising meant at Flipkart, what did Indian consumers want, etc., etc. And the reason why we were maybe lagging and we were in such a situation is because we tried to copy what an Alibaba did in China, right? Because we
Yes.
said, hey, we are Flipkart, we're going to be the next Alibaba, let's go and do what an Alibaba did, right?
Mm.
Whereas the question should have been, hey, what are we? What does the Indian consumer wants? How does the Indian ad ecosystem work? And how do you build towards that, right? And so that is a hard lesson for us to learn less than 3 months in, which makes what came next even more impressive because in the next 9 months, we turned things completely around. We launched new products. launched new ways of thinking, came up with a new business model, and that model is what gave us the boost in revenues and in everything, right? Therefore, yes, I mean, there will be periods where things are hard, but if you use that as a period to rethink, reimagine, and redo, it will be a learning opportunity and not a disaster, right?
Yes, yes, definitely. And I think we should maybe address the questions in the chat at this point. There are a lot of questions I see popping up.
Sure. Go ahead.
Alright, if anyone else also has questions, please DM them to me. We'll take them now. One of them wants to know how has fintech played a role in his life without him realizing it. Oh, all right. So would you say that so splitting your bill with your partner using Venmo or maybe tapping our phone at a restaurant and playing by GP, all these are also sort of applications of fintech?
Oh, totally, right? Totally.
All right. So it has been playing a big part in their lives without even realizing. And also, would
Look,
you
even
say
for
that?
example, right? I mean, look, a lot of you guys, in fact, I love the Indian ecosystem because it's so diverse. Look, a lot of us, when we went to IIM Ahmedabad 20 years ago, we didn't have the money to pay the fees, right? And we had to
Hmm,
take loans, and it was so painful to take loans. But there's a startup called Clearank, again, founded by an IIT Delhi chap, that gives access to easy loans to anyone that goes to any college. It's not just IITs and IIMs. Clearank gives loans to people that go to any sort of recognized college in most states in India, right? I think they pretty much cover
hmm.
about top 20 to 30 in, I think, 20 to 30 states. So that's almost like 1,000 plus colleges or universities in India, right? And that's a huge portion of the Indian population, right? And Clearank lets you do it in a very easy, seamless manner. They verify who you are with the university as long as you have a university account and the university says that yes, this person is registered there, you get a loan instantaneously, right? And you don't need to go to the hoops, which for people like me took 3 to 4 months back in 2000. And I hear that for others, it's maybe not 3 to 4 months, it still takes 3 to 4 weeks, whereas Clarent does it in 3 to 4 minutes, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Therefore, I mean, those are examples of fintech doing a job even without you knowing that they are doing it, right?
Hmm. So, fintech sort of it's a buzzword right now, but that doesn't exactly mean that it is new, right? So, would you also categorize the invention of ATMs back in the 1860s? Would that also count as
Hey, that is not the
innovation in fintech?
1860s. The
Oh,
first
I'm
ATM
sorry,
came up in
the year. I'm
1960.
I'm sorry, I might not know the exact year.
And in fact, the Barclays was the firm that came up with it.
Okay,
And
okay.
yes, I mean, I would say, and this goes back to innovation, right? Look, an ATM is fintech, a credit
Hmm.
card is fintech, a debit card is fintech, right?
Ah, yes, yes.
And as I said, a credit scoring that HDFC Bank does. So HDFC Bank has actually done credit scoring for tens of millions of Indian consumers on the back end, and they have a database, and that is fintech, right? So
Hmm.
ultimately, yes, there's a lot of fintech that happens behind that we are not aware of. And what Clearank does is fintech. And in fact, there's a very interesting company. They unfortunately went bankrupt last year due to COVID. But it's a company called Bond, again, company based out of Bangalore. They pretty much said, hey, we are going to give credit cards or debit cards. They just called it the Bond Cash Card to Uber, Ola, and other Swiggy, Zomato delivery people because it was very painful for them to get money from Swiggy or Ola or Uber or Zomato, right? So they said, we'll give a
Yes.
card, it'll link to their Zomato account, and the moment Zomato sends money, it'll come into that money and they can use it on a real time basis. That is fintech, right?
All
And that's
right.
again fintech playing a part which you don't even see because we all know how tough it's for immigrant workers in India, how tough it's to be an Uber driver, and how tough it's to be a Zomato or Swiggy worker. And you can at least make that less painful by giving them access to their money immediately, right? So that is fintech.
Yes,
And this is what I mean
definitely.
by solving problems, right?
Hmm.
Once you know a space and you're saying, I'm going to solve a problem, it completely changes the granularity of the space, right? It's almost like painting a picture, right? I mean, there are people that paint a picture and you might have the fake modern art. Actually, let me not use the word fake. There's modern art and people think
So,
it's art. Then there's art where you're painting maybe a festival or you're painting even if you look at the background behind me, right? That's essentially a temple in Thailand. There's so many
Ah,
details that come to
hmm.
your attention once you pay attention to detail. Right? This goes back to the grind. I mean, once you say, hey, you know what, I'm going to look at this piece and this component and solve for it. Right? Easy.
Yes. So, would we categorize this like any sort of inconvenience or any sort of unpleasant experience that you might feel in your financial life? Fintech is sort of seeking to resolve this. Like we
Yeah,
had the
totally. Well,
mentioned ATMs,
if you
then we
look at
have fintech.
India, for instance, look, I talk about Zero Da, right? I mean, look at what Zero Da is doing. It's essentially saying, hey, we will come up with brokerage accounts and zero fee brokerage accounts. And someone like me, right? When I
Hmm.
started trading way back then, I think you had the E-Trades of the world and some of these other companies. But I remember that someone like Fidelity, I mean, since I was at Barclays and I was in a very highly regulated market, Barclays only allowed you to trade with the Fidelity or some other entity, and I chose Fidelity because I knew the brand name. This is about 15, 18 years ago. But Fidelity used to charge, I think, $50 to $75 per transaction.
Hmm.
Then later, that money came down to about $15 to $20 per transaction. Even now, they charge me, I think, $7.50 per transaction, right? Now think
Yes.
about
All right.
how ridiculous is it, right? So someone who
Mm-hmm.
just says, "Hey, I want to invest maybe $500 a month," which is still a big amount of money for young people when you're starting off in your careers, and they may charge you 10% of that as a transaction fee. You're not going to be investing. You're not going to be doing anything with that, right?
Yes, definitely.
And whereas look at what a Robinhood does, look at what a Zero does. They pretty much said, "Hey, we have eliminated brokerage fees completely."
Hmm.
So fintech has now forced Fidelities of the world to change their ways. Right? Fidelity still charges a commission, but it's significantly smaller than what it was earlier. And the
Oh.
average size of trading account at Robinhood is something like $260, right?
Hmm.
Whereas supposedly the average account at Fidelity is something like $20,000, right? So what Robinhood has now done is they enable people with $200 to trade, to invest. And that's again disruption, right? So you have fintech completely changing the way something that was painful to do earlier, and you could do it now.
Uh, Definitely. And also, I think in these recent times, people have sort of developed a fascination with cryptocurrency. Does
Correct.
that also come under fintech?
That's
Does
also
that also
fintech. I
come?
mean, crypto is a very different world, right? I mean, it's I think tough for anyone to be an expert in crypto. I mean, unless people who have made it. But even then, it's a
Yeah.
store of value, right? It's crypto is a very different conversation altogether, right? I see
Hmm.
crypto as look, I don't know how many of you know, but there's commodities that people trade. Right? So there are multiple entities in the world that trade commodities. I mean, they trade oil, they trade corn, they
Yes.
trade a bunch of that. And commodity trading is very interesting because I really don't see the real life applications of commodities except for people that are big commodity players. And I think crypto might, in my opinion, end up being similar to commodities. It will be a multi-trillion-dollar market,
Hmm.
but the real life use for most people in the world is going to be limited, right?
Yes. All right. I think we are done with the questions in the chat as of now. And well, I think thank you so much for being a part of Industry X, sir. And I'm sure all the students enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. And I think Anmol maybe has something to say.
Yeah, so I think completed it perfectly. So thank you very much, Krishnan sir, for joining us, and we hope to interact with you sometime in the future also. So yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, hey, thanks a lot, guys. Thank you, Anmol, and thank you, Abhinav. I hope it was helpful for the folks on the call, and enjoyed speaking with you guys. Thank you.
Definitely.
Yeah, bye bye.
Bye.
Bye.